My name is Steve Hanley, and this is
Rob Carter, principal engineer at enDAQ Technology, and in this case, Lab Rat.
And Rob's not just a principal engineer here at enDAQ, which is the enDAQ brand is part of the enDAQ organization. He's also the face and voice and heart and mind of the piezo.com website and brand as well. But today he's going to be working with me to analyze some enDAQ vibration data he took in a recent race.
Yep.
And so we'll get into it here together. So the first part, I'm just looking at. I'm going to zoom in a bit. Maybe I'll zoom in a little bit more. On the race, do you want to talk about the race a little bit?
Yeah, just a little bit. This is a 6.17K race, so it's not a standard 5 or 10. And it began here at Lord Hobo Brewing and went down the chute and made a left-hand turn to start with and went around this way. There was the first mile, the second mile, the third mile, and then there was this sort of hill detail in here, and then a fast down and back to the starting line. So that's
and then you had some beer.
Where the beer was.
Yeah.
The important part was, the lab rats need a reward at the end of the experiment. So that was it. And here's a contour of the race. This is the up-down part. So it was kind of level in here, and we had a little bump in, and here's the big hill at the end, and then they did straight downhill. And this is where the beer was, right there.
And so we're going to be looking at the enDAQ data for most of this, but we had a comparison.
Yeah, so I took this data with a commercial product called Stride, and it's worn on the foot. It's somewhat similar to an enDAQ, but it's much, much smaller, and it doesn't take data as fast, so we don't trust it as much, maybe. And this black line is supposedly the vertical contour that was taken by analyzing the data from my foot. And the green line is the pace, but it's in kilometers per hour, but you could see it was relatively steady. I slowed down a little bit here on the hill, and then I went fast downhill. And these are, we put these in here because it's another set of data, and we want to know what to expect. What do we expect? So based on we know the terrain.
Yeah.
And also, you should know as experimenters, where exactly was this sensor? Well, here to solve the mystery.
Careful, we should have said no, not safe for work before you scroll down there. But
we have failed.
Yes.
Yeah, so anyway, there it is being installed. It was taped right to the base of my spine. You could say that.
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
So.
And we should take note too of the orientation. So the x-axis up was
on the enDAQ.
Vertical.
On the enDAQ, x-axis was right up the spine, y-axis perpendicular to the x-axis, and z was straight ahead.
Yep.
Forward and back.
Yep. Right. And then before we get into the Python, though, we have some other reference data. Well, and as we go through this data, we have a couple goals where we're going to try to get the total distance run from the acceleration data. We'll see that we can't quite do that, but we can certainly do the pace first time, total elevation. We'll do some other fun things. But here's some reference.
I just stuck this in. This is me running, but not during that race. But it tells you what actually goes on. This blue line is attached to my hip. So this is the motion of the hip. As you can see, it's sort of an undulation thing. It's not quite a sinusoid. It's kind of sharper here. And this is the motion of the foot. And this is good to remember what happens. The foot comes down and then it hits hard and does this reverses, a really jolt at this point. Right now, my right foot is jolting, but back here it was my left foot.
Yes.
It's when that happens, the whole body shakes. So we should expect some spikes somewhere around in here, and we should expect to see some smooth running.
Yep.
Here, because this is closer to where we had the enDAQ mounted,
right.
So it should look sort of like that.
Also with that data, Rob's, he's not just a piezo scientist, he's also any type of data in
so this
physics.
Data, this data was not taken with an accelerometer, it was taken right off of the video. So this is the orbit of my left foot. And it would just go around and around this sort of egg-shaped thing, which agrees well with what people have measured on a treadmill. This was taken in the wild. And over here, we have the vertical, the red is vertical acceleration of my hip. So that's that sine wave. And so that is that's from the video, it's a sine wave. So we'll be looking to see if that's what the enDAQ tells us. And this blue line is the progress of the hip along the parallel to the ground. And you notice that's quite a bit steadier than the vertical. So this is what running is. You jostle your limbs around all which way to make a steady forward progress. So let's see what enDAQ says.
All right, so in order to do the analysis with our open source library, we first have to install it, which you can do with pip install enDAQ. Here I'm installing the development branch because we always have features in development. This, when you do pip install enDAQ, it also installs all the dependencies that the library has. I'm also installing a library called Kaleido to save plots as images. So that's all I need. And this is it's called Google Colab. It's basically a Google Doc for writing and executing Python code and sharing with colleagues. So I prefer using this for quick analysis and things that I want to present and share. But you can also do this locally in a Jupyter notebook or any other type of Python IDE to write and execute your code. So it's free, open source, and please, we encourage you to use it and get the most out of your data. So let's get into it. So the first thing, I'm loading in the libraries I'll use, which includes the enDAQ library, Plotly for generating some plots, and then NumPy and SciPy for doing some more advanced data analysis, although I don't even think I use SciPy throughout this, and then Pandas to structure a lot of my data as data frames, which is basically just tables. So here, first I'm pulling in the data sets. This is an IDE file. It's a file format by enDAQ that structures all the different sensor data sampled at all these different rates. You can download this file, click this link, and you can download it locally. And once I have the data object, I can load all the data, which I do here, as well as generating this table summary of all the information, all the channels that were turned on during this test. So we have the primary accelerometer with this 40G MEMS accelerometer, and it was sampling at 1,000 hertz, about 4 million or almost 5 million data points. We had the temperature, internal temperature and pressure sensor. We had an external temperature and pressure sensor and humidity that was sampling at 10 hertz. And then we had the quaternion data, which gives us orientation, and that was sampling at 100 hertz. So once I have all the data, I can quickly do this visualization with one of the functions in our library, which I'm doing here. We'll I'm not going to spend much time on it because.
Oh, wait, not so fast. What's the This is the temperature of the enDAQ?
Yes. Yep.
That's amazing. Does that mean that the temperature dropped?
This is the temperature.
That's the temperature. So I got hotter and hotter, and then I started to cool off.
Yes, but it could have been just from where the sun was too. Sun
yes.
maybe was behind you over here, and I don't know.
That's interesting.
And we do. This is our second take here, so we've picked up something new. Hopefully, we find some other things as we go. So now I have the acceleration data, and this is a data frame. So it's indexed by time, which is nice. This is real calendar time, and then the X, Y, and Z axis acceleration. I apply a high pass filter as well as low pass filter actually to focus on 2 to 200 hertz, and then I visualize it. And so this is the whole time series.
This is all the time we had the instrument turned on.
Yes.
from when Brian strapped it to my back, and you can see I might have stomped up and down here, but I just went out for a little warm up and down the street. Then I came back in the corral and I made my way through the crowd so I could get at the back because I'm not that fast. And so this
he may not be fast, but he's very steady, as we'll see.
This block of data is the race itself. So here I am not running. The gun goes off. I run like hell. I get to the end, and then that's it. Right, this little bit here, that's important. That's the beer.
Good. So yeah, this is whole duration of the test. We're going to focus for most of the rest of this video from 1518 to 1558, which is roughly when he was racing. So before we get to the acceleration data, though, I'm going to look at the pressure data. So I'm now pulling in that data frame, and I'm resampling it at 1 hertz because I don't need 10 hertz pressure data. I also then calculate altitude in feet from the pressure data, and then I plot them both on the same axis here. So the top is pressure, but we're going to focus on altitude. Again, the race started over here, and so this, and I zoom in, this is kind of a nice, more detailed view, honestly, of that's
the race. So you notice this has more bumps and wiggles than the other data that we showed you that came from the other instrument, because we are taking data at 1,000 cycles per second, and I don't know what's in that little pod, but I know they're not taking it that fast. You can't see.
Yeah. Well, the pressure one we're only taking at 10 hertz, but yeah.
But it's still better.
Yeah.
I think overall, this is a favorable. It identifies well with the map data that we have and with the data from the other guy's barometer.
Yeah. I mean, you could zoom in here too. This is, it's even making distinctions between 4 feet of elevation. So,
and that was happening, I'll tell you.
It was a slow, steady uphill.
Bumpy road.
So another thing we'll do before we get to the acceleration is look at the quaternion outputs. This is the orientation. It's hard to view quaternion data over time in this view. So we have a function in our library to animate it animate the coordinate system over time. So here you can see he's mostly leaning forward throughout of his race, which is good. He's trying to run forward. And if you look at this top view, you can kind of see him turning at different parts.
Do you see that first left turn? Is that what we were looking at?
Yeah, so he's going right here. Now he's going left. That was a hard right.
Yep.
Hard right.
Every turn in the race.
Yeah. So that's cool. We could dive into that deeper maybe if for other data sets, but the quaternion is helpful to kind of give you the orientation of something over time. We're going to focus on the acceleration and the vibration throughout the test. Here's the time history. And now here's just 5/100ths of a second. And we can see, obviously, every event has a large acceleration when it hits the ground. And so we're going to focus on that, but I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can kind of see this.
These are the big jolts. We pointed out that when the foot lands, it's a big crunch, and a shock wave goes through the body. And I'm not sure about what all these little wiggles mean, but these are the details, and it's at approximately the right cadence to represent footfalls. So this is a very good marker. These are excellent, strong signal markers for footfalls. So we can count that as steps.
Yep. And a couple of things too to highlight. Rob and I had a really fun discussion when we're saying, remember, x-axis was pointing, positive x is up. And so you'd think when you hit the ground, your body's accelerating upward, which is true for your foot and the lower part of your leg. But if you notice, you kind of jump up and down. When you hit the ground, your center of gravity, your leg bends. And so there's a sudden downward motion every time you hit the ground when you're measuring from the center of gravity or your center of mass. So that's a pretty cool thing we learned as we looked at this data that wasn't obvious to us initially. The other thing I just want to highlight is when he leaving the ground, there's a bit of almost a 2G acceleration as he jumps up. So he's, yeah. But as he said, we're going to focus. We can see every time he hits the ground is a very distinct peak. And so we'll look at these peaks and count these peaks to understand his cadence, how many steps he's taking. So I use a function called peak finding, and I very easily can identify each event, which I do here. And once I know the events, I resample it to see how many events happen on a 10-second duration or 30 seconds. I chose 10 because it was the right amount of. If I chose 1 second, it got a little bit coarse, which is counterintuitive. Coarse in the sense that 10 seconds was the right amount to resample it. If I plot that over time, here's his steps per second when I divide it by 10. And it's very steady, but we did want to call out.
Yeah, you see it's very steady all along. It's you see that's quite steady. And then you get this spot, you see this big down. So here we are at 3 steps per second. And then there's this dip goes down to 1 step per second. Well, I happen to remember when that was in the race. And there was kind of a traffic jam. There was a parked car and a car coming on into the stream of runners, and everybody was trying to squeeze between the two cars. And I slowed down because it looked rather dangerous. And then I was in a hurry to get going, and you can see that after I slowed down, I really picked it up.
Yeah, and we zoom in a bit.
We were still going uphill at that point.
So if we remove that major slowdown when he had the traffic jam, you can see, as we'll talk about a little more later on, you had good pace here. You slowed down a bit going up the hill and then accelerated. But remember, this was calculated just by saying how many events are there and then counting that on a 10-second rolling window.
And it's steps per second, not pace.
Steps per second.
But it does tell you cadence. It tells you something about what the runner is trying to do.
So I want to see though, runners care about minute miles. What's their pace? How fast they're running per, and that's typically how people measure it: minute miles, how many minutes per mile. So if we know how many steps he's taking, we can understand. We also know the total distance of the race, which was 6.17 kilometers, and we'll assume that Rob ran in a perfectly straight line.
Yes, we will.
And wasn't weaving past runners as he was passing.
Well, I was passing everyone.
Yeah. So if we assume the straight line, every step was about 0.83 meters. But as he said, he was weaving, so it was maybe a little longer than that, but that's okay. And so now I have that. I can calculate how many meters per minute. Once I might multiply it by the meters per step, and there's 6 10-second segments in a minute. And then I take the inverse of that to get minutes per meter, and then I know how many meters there are in a mile, and so now I know minutes per mile, and I plot that. Again, there's a big peak when he was slowing down for the traffic jam.
Yeah, now that I look at that number, it was over 50 minutes per mile. It would have taken me 50 minutes to complete an entire mile at that pace. It's pretty slow. I had to really get out of the way.
Yeah.
And but I didn't stop, which would have been much higher than it would have been hundreds of minutes per mile. So that is, if you see that kind of signature in this data, it means you had to slow down for something.
Yeah. But generally you're running a little over 10-minute miles.
Yep.
Good and very steady, which is good. All right, so that was somewhat dumb analysis again, counting peaks per unit of time. Let's do some more traditional vibration analysis and looking at the frequency domain. So I'm using our aggregate FFT function, which is basically averaging a bunch of FFTs together. So even though I have a long time duration, I don't have to have a bin width that's directly proportional to my time duration. I can specify it by averaging. So I do that here, and this is my FFT at the entire race. And there's the peak, 3.1 steps per second. That's his dominant frequency here. There's some harmonics, which we don't quite understand.
That's the most interesting part about all this data. Look at that. Look at this, pretty evenly spaced, and you get the one big one. That was where the foot impacts, but the body is semi-solid, and I'm a little bit like a plucked string here, but I don't know what part of me was singing. But it goes on out. Look at those little significant peaks up at 25 hertz.
Yeah,
is really I'm ringing like a bell here.
He's so hard and stiff.
Maybe.
Yeah. All right. So then if we also look at the y-axis, I thought this was pretty interesting. So the y is side to side. Here's that peak at 3.1 hertz, but there's more dominant peaks at higher frequencies. There's one at 4.7. So this is some twisting or is arm motion.
Not sure.
We're not entirely sure.
Pretty high frequency.
So that's pretty interesting.
That's my bones rattling.
And the z-axis, you can also see that kind of 4.7 one that we see in the y. And this is the forward motion, so maybe. So it is. But it's more dominated by the number of steps. But one thing to call out here is, again, this race was over 40 minutes or so.
Yeah.
The frequency content isn't going to be steady that entire time. It's good to do this FFT or this PSD of a long duration test to get what the average is. But remember, it's just the average. And so I get concerned when I see a lot of engineers focusing just on that and not looking at a rolling FFT or a spectrogram to see how things change over time, to just make sure that the average is representative of your real test.
I could give you a suggestion on that if later on, if we want to reparse some of this. We could look at the data just for running uphill, on the level, and downhill, and you might see it resolve, and it wouldn't look like this.
Right.
The peaks would be different.
So we have a function to do that called rolling FFT, which I'm calling here, specifying a bin width of 1 hertz. That's too coarse though, so I need to then I'm doing it again actually and specifying a bin width of 0.1 hertz. And now when I have that, I can see this heat map of that peak frequency over time. And this gives us a little bit more resolution than when we were counting the number of events per unit of time, because we're doing a lot of overlapping segments and averaging them. So overlap gives us some more resolution.
This is a high speed here, right? That's what that is.
There's more steps per second.
More steps per second. Could be a high speed.
Yeah.
It's either that or I was taking really short steps. So we'll see.
Yep.
We'll look ahead.
So this function helps us visualize that rolling FFT. There's also a way to visualize it as a peak. Is this? I don't think it's live. So now I want to plot this against the pace, against the altitude.
Right.
So I'm pulling in now the altitude here, and now we have this view, which we can look at here.
I actually asked Steve to do that
because
I wanted to see if you could see any connection between these two, and you can. Here we're going along, and the pace is here, and then as I get to going up this hill, the pace drops down. And then as we get to the top of the hill, we go down, it picks back up again going into this thing, and then it's sort of level here. This isn't really that much of a slope. I told everybody in the crew when I saw this huge uphill section here at the very end of the race, that they better watch it. And I know, and on the map, there's Garfield Street here, and there's Madison Street here. I said, when you get up this hill, you're going to be a little bit tired. Just watch for Garfield. That's the beginning of the flat spot. And when you get to Madison, look out because this guy's coming. And
then you go fast on the downhill.
And I got to the peak, and you could see that I was coasting down the hill on wheels because the pace went way up.
And he wants to get that beer. It's almost within sight.
Which is right down here.
Yeah. So that's the bulk of our analysis, but the last thing we're going to do is the integration for displacement. And the first thing I'm showing here is when I just do a dumb integration and I do the trapezoidal method. I don't try to condition the data at all. I see that there's this runaway displacement after doing the double integration. At first I see this and I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's his forward motion. Yep, sorry. I thought maybe that's his forward motion, so I let it plot out the whole time. And he goes, oh, he ran 1/10 of a mile, which isn't true. So
I did not cheat.
Yeah, no. So I caution people, and this is why we have a function in our library for the integration that includes ways to help improve that integration, to remove error from low frequency content and DC bias and stuff. So there's a built-in high pass filter after every step, which I'm specifying here. I'm also resetting the 0 point to be the median between every integration, and I'm applying a 2-key window, which forces the beginning and the end of the signal to 0 to, again, make sure it's an oscillation. And then when we're focusing on an oscillation, the integration becomes quite a bit more accurate. And so here's that double, a couple seconds of the of his running and displacement, the double integral of that. He's going up and down 1.5 inches and side to side about 1/2 inch.
Yeah, that's about right. That agrees with other data that I've taken in the past.
He's very steady.
Yeah, good pace.
It's a good runner. And with that, I think that's the end of our video here of how to analyze some running data or any vibration data with enDAQ sensors and our enDAQ Python library, which again is free. It's open source, so I encourage you to start in a Google Colab environment or run it locally. Anything you want to add, Rob?
Oh, it's a lot of fun being a lab rat, and the beer was good.
The beer was good, and Rob's going to start learning Python, right?
Yes, this is a very inspiring session, Steve. I gotta say, because I'm an absolute beginner when it comes to Python, but I think safe to say I've been waiting for something like this all my life, all my physics life anyway, and I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, and we hope our library makes it easier to get into doing some of this somewhat advanced analysis, but with an easy API. It's easy function calls. It's very readable. So I know it's code, and code can be scary, but if you get into it and read through this, you'll see it's pretty easy to follow along and see how to manipulate it and make it suited for your analysis. And we want to make you look good by presenting your data in a meaningful and interactive way, which this also lets you do. So please let us know and if you have any questions, but we hope you get a lot out of it. Yeah. Till next time, please subscribe, and you'll see Rob and I doing some more of this in the future.
Yes, we will.
This was fun. All right, thanks, everyone.